Hi, I'm Char, and we are at Decatur Makers. I'm one of the woodshop teachers here as well as a board member, and today we are going to talk about the miter saw. The miter saw is located in the woodshop. It is mainly used for cross-cutting, and we're going to get into that soon. But first, we need to talk about safety. Once you come into the shop, the first thing that you want to do is make sure you turn on the air filter to eliminate a lot of the dust that could be in the air. Secondly, PPE is the most important thing. You want to make sure you protect your body while you're here at the shop. So I have eye protection, also have hearing protection, and a mask. Now this mask is not the mask that you would typically wear while you're woodworking, but given the current situation, I'm making sure that I keep everybody else safe and I'm keeping myself safe while we're here in the shop. You want to make sure that you do not have any loose clothing, dangling jewelry, and any hair that could potentially get caught in the blade. After all those things are checked off, we are ready to start cutting. Miter saws are primarily used for cross-cutting, and what that means is we are making a cut across the grain. The lines, the patterns that you see here, that is the grain. Picture this. This was once in the center of a tree, and the tree grew around like this, and then it was sliced, and there's different terms that we use, quarter sawn, just to slice that tree right down the middle and to make it the dimensions that you see being sold in the store or at your local lumber yard. And the reason why the miter saw is used for cross-cutting is because we need the power of the fence to control our workpiece. Now let's get into the actual miter saw and where we're going to place this wood to ensure safe cutting. The name of this saw is a 12-inch compound miter saw. The compound means that it can not only cut miter cuts, but it can also cut bevel cuts. And we'll talk about the difference here in a second. Let's talk about the different features of this saw. First, you have the blade. The blade is 12 inches in diameter, which means that the widest board it can cut is 12 inches. Next, you see that the blade is locked down. I cannot move it here. When you get ready to cut, there's a knob over here on the left side of the miter saw. You want to make sure that you are holding down the handle of the saw, pull this out, and that lifts the blade. When the saw is not in use, be sure to push it back down and lock the blade. And that prevents any accidents that may happen here in the shop. The next thing that I want to show you is the table of the saw and all of the angles. One of the most commonly used angles is probably 22.5, 45 degrees, and probably 60 after that. When you think of a picture frame or a door frame or even baseboard, this would be the time that you would go ahead and change the angle. And how you do that is you push this button down here and you slide it over to where you want it to stop. So I'm going to position it at 45 degrees. And that will give me an angle cut and what we call a miter joint. Now I'll swing it back over to 0. And at 0, that means that you have a right angle or a 90-degree cut. Most importantly, as we talk about here in the shop, is always safety, because these tools can be very dangerous if they're not properly cared for. On the bed here, there's 2 hands with a line through them, and what those mean is your hand should never rest in this area here. You always want to make sure that you're holding on to your stock outside of this area. Very, very important. Here you have the fence. The fence is here to position your workpiece against. For no reason should you ever attempt to cut any wood without any support, because you can get something called kickback, and kickback is when the wood actually kicks back at you, and it can be very painful and very dangerous. So we make sure that we keep the fence in place. Both of these fences are able to be adjusted. There's a knob on the back of the right and the left side, and once you loosen it, you can slide the fence in or out, depending on the length of your wood. Next, I want to talk about bevels. We talked about miters, now we talk about bevels. The way that you position the saw in order to cut a bevel cut is right back here in the back. There's a knob all the way back here. First, we need to raise our blade, and I'm going to twist that knob to loosen it, and you can tilt the saw there. And we'll also talk about what bevel cuts look like here in a second. Make sure you tighten it back once you're finished with the bevels and lock your saw back down in position. Here we see the zero clearance insert plate. This should always be in place before you operate the saw. And what this does is it collects wood chips and sawdust so they don't clog up the blade and get in the way of your cut. On top of the miter saw, you'll also find a switch that turns on the light to ensure that you can perfectly see your line, where you're cutting, and for better visuals. All miter saws are equipped with a hold down clamp, and this is to serve in place of using your hand as pressure to make sure that your workpiece is secured. Behind both sides of the miter saw is a slot to position your hold down clamp and secure your wood. So if the bulk of your stock is on the right side of the blade, the clamp drops down in this hole behind the fence, and you can use this clamp to tighten the bar in place, and then you can lower it to make sure that it is secure against your workpiece. And those are the main features of the miter saw. When you get ready to cut, you want to make sure that you have your cut line measured before you start. The speed squares live right here, and they are great for drawing perfect lines on your workpiece. So I'm going to take my speed square, butt it up against my workpiece, and just going to draw a line right there. So that is where I want to make my cut. There's a couple of other things that I want to check before I start cutting. One, that's to make sure that my saw is powered up. And here is the outlet here. Make sure it's powered up. The next thing that I want to do is turn on the dust collection by pulling this out. Pulling this blast gate open turns on the dust collection not only for the miter saw, but for all the tools in the shop, and then pushing it closed turns off the dust collection for all the tools in the shop. Now I'm ready to get my PPP on. First, my eye protection, and then my hearing protection. A fun fact is that the miter saw is actually the loudest tool in the shop. It has the highest number of decibels. So if you run this saw continuously all day, you will hear ringing in your ears by the evening. Once you approach the saw, you want to unlock it, raise your blade, and take your workpiece. You want to inspect your workpiece to make sure you don't see any nails, screws, or staples, or anything metal on your board, or something that might hinder it from getting a great cut. And you can position your piece right underneath the blade. Now here's something that you want to keep in mind. The kerf, or the width of the blade, is about 1/8 of an inch. If you cut on the line, you will actually be cutting a little bit shorter than you probably intended. So be careful when you position your blade that you cut it a little bit over from the actual line, about right there. The best place to stand when using the miter saw is to the left of the blade. Now, I'm right-handed, so I'll be able to use the lever on this side and hold my workpiece down on this side. I'm using my fingers like this as a hook, not only to make sure that I'm holding my workpiece down, but I'm also pushing it up against the fence so that it doesn't move. Remember, you can also use the hold down clamp to assist you. So I'm going to stand here in front of the saw, parallel with the wall before I get ready to cut. If you are left-handed and you do not feel comfortable using your right hand to operate the saw, then you would move to the right of the saw and consider moving the length of your board over here so that you have additional control. The other thing that you want to remember is the term that we call kickback. Kickback is when the blade grabs hold of your wood and could potentially spin it and kick it back to whomever is standing behind you. So before you get ready to cut, if your piece that you are cutting off is fairly small, and by fairly small, I mean less than 4 inches, you have a greater potential of experiencing kickback. So be mindful of anyone standing behind you. You can say, "Excuse me, I'm getting ready to cut," or you can just wait until they are finished with their job. We are a community here, and we're here to work together, and everyone is pretty great about keeping everyone safe. So never be afraid to ask for help or anything that you may need while you're here. When you first turn on the saw, your first reaction might be to jump back because the power and the force of the motor is quite strong. But just remember to stand in place, hold on to the trigger, and pull down, but don't let go. Before you turn on the saw, make sure that you position the blade 1/4 inch above your workpiece before pushing the trigger. Once you do this, you can push the trigger, push the blade all the way through your workpiece, and ensure that the blade stops completely before lifting it up. If you ever need to make repeated cuts, there's a simple way to do it. And what I did was set up what's called a stop block. This is a scrap piece of wood clamped to the fence with a quick clamp. We have plenty of quick clamps located on the back wall in the shop. You can place your workpiece up against the stop block, make a cut, remove it, and cut another piece. In this way, all of your pieces will be equally cut. You can also cross-cut boards as wide as 12 inches, and we'll talk about what changes when you cut a wider board. Everything is pretty much the same, except you'll have to pull the saw out just a little bit before you start cutting. When cutting miter cuts, you can position the table in any direction that you like. Here, I'm moving it to a 45-degree angle. This is perfect for picture frames, and 45 degrees is great to get tight miters. The tallest workpiece that you can stand up on the table is approximately 5 inches. This would be used for bevel cuts. Once you twist the knob behind the saw, you can position the angle anywhere from 0 to 45 degrees. This is great for hiding plywood edges. Make sure once you stand your workpiece up that you press it firmly against the fence. Another type of cut that you can do with wood is called a rip cut. And a rip cut is when you cut with the grain. So our grain pattern is going this way instead of this way. You can rip wood, but never on the miter saw, and here's why. This is just an example, but make sure that you never rip cut on the miter saw. As you see here, I don't have quite enough support to rip this board here. I have just a small amount of support here. I have nothing to brace my wood on the side. So this is much, much longer than the support I have here. So you want your ratios to be equal. This ratio does not equal this ratio. Therefore, we don't have enough stability to safely rip cut this board. This will be a function that you would perform on a table saw. Oftentimes, blades can dull. This can happen as a result of wet wood, wood that is particularly hard or sticky, or for any reason, just for overuse. No worries. The Makerspace has plenty of blades. Please see one of the Makerspace managers or one of the captains here, and they will be happy to assist you in changing the blade on the saw. Make sure that you budget enough time to clean up after you're done working. Most importantly, you want to make sure you vacuum up your workspace to make sure that it's neat for the next member. We have a vacuum cleaner located in the shop where you can use to vacuum all sawdust in and around and on the floor of your workspace. Be sure to pick up any scrap pieces that you may have used. And we have a scrap wood bin located right outside of the door where you can save longer pieces. Shorter pieces such as this one and this one can be placed in the trash can near the door. Make sure you collect all of your personal items before you go. Tape measures, pencils, levels, papers, anything that you may have used while you were here. We want to ensure that our makerspace stays neat and nice and a place where community feels at home while they're here.